welcome back to my show. In today's episode, we have a really special guest here with us today. We have the author, Jenn Bishop. Hi, Jenn. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great, thanks.
I'm so happy to have you on the show. So could you please introduce yourself and your latest book?
Sure. So my latest book came out last year. It was called Where We Used to Roam. I'm a middle grade author that's based in Cincinnati. And so Where We Used to Roam is actually split between the Boston area where I used to live and Wyoming, where I spent a summer when I was in college. And it is the story of a girl who's entering sixth grade and kind of has all these ideas of what sixth grade is going to be. And then those expectations are sort of shattered. And by the end of sixth grade, she's betrayed her longtime best friend, and her older brother has become addicted to painkillers and he has to go to rehab. And her parents think the best thing to do is to send her to Wyoming for the summer to stay with family friends. And Emma is sort of grateful. Sorry, her name is Emma. She's grateful for that opportunity to get away from things, but she also does feel like she's a little bit running away from her problems. It's hard for me to describe this book because it starts off and she's on the plane to Wyoming, and then you jump back in time, and then it isn't until the midpoint that you meet up with, like when she's on the plane, and then the story continues from there.
That's really nice. In the following years, I feel like flashbacks are kind of like not used mainly when they use a mystery, but I love the way like how we have used flashback in a contemporary novel, which is not a mystery novel. It's like realistic fiction, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it helps create some suspense for the reader, I think, with this story. And I think it also is important because a chunk of the story does take place in like a totally different location with a new cast of characters that you need to signal that because you're going to describe that on like the flap copy. So I think it made sense to start. It's almost like a flash forward, and then like because a lot like it is like almost like a whole half of the book does take place in that like sixth grade year before we get to the summer. But at certain points, like I wasn't even sure. In early drafts, I actually alternated. So The Distance to Home is set jumping between two summers. And my first draft of this book started in the summer and then jumped back to different points during the school year. And at some point I realized that like was not serving the story as well. So I changed it.
That's really nice. Like, I guess during revision processes, you learn more about like how you can improve your work, right? So actually, before I come to the question regarding your revision process and everything, I would like to know whether your book has been inspired by any of your real life events or set in the place where you live or used to live.
Yeah, so it definitely is set. It's the part that's set like in the Boston area. I used to live outside of Boston, so I drew in my memories of being in that place. And then the part where that's set in Wyoming is very much set. I fictionalized the town, but it's based on a real place. But the events of the story are largely fictional. I find like the things that I wrote earlier in my life, I tended to draw more from my real life. And as I've moved on and progressed as a writer, my books are more and more like entirely fictional. But I feel like I always give my characters like little kernels of myself. And so Emma, when she's in Wyoming, becomes obsessed with bison. And when I went to Wyoming, I became obsessed with bison. So that's the part of the story that like really connects to me on a personal level.
That's really nice. I guess like all your ideas, I think for any author, even if you're writing fiction, you get most of your life, most of your ideas from real life experience, which you may be fictionalizing or even be putting it exactly how it was.
Yeah, I feel like, we're always grabbing little kernels from the whole world that's around us. Like where else can we come up with our ideas? Like besides the world that we live in. But it's always interesting to see how differently things are arranged. I think that's what helps make any story might seem like it's the same as somebody else's story when you just describe it in one sentence, but because we all live, such unique lives with all of the details being different, I think that's what helps make everybody's story so unique.
Yeah, and the other thing is like, even like as I said, like to like, for example, if let's say you were writing a book about, about a wolf and a pig, kind of like the Three Little Pigs, but you kind of like write your own story about it. That way, one idea can be written in many ways. Like you could write it a different way, whereas another author could have written it a different way.
Definitely, yeah.
So my next question is, as I said earlier, about revision. Like, how does the revision process work? How many drafts do you go through how do you revise and what do you do?
Oh boy, so I'm just at the end of the revision process on my 5th book. And I think the most important takeaway for me is that every revision is a little different, just like the process of every book is different. And I've learned to accept that each book takes the journey it takes to get that book done. My 5th book is coming out next year with Chronicle. And I felt like that was the first book where I felt like I had like a whole idea for like a whole story, just like a bolt of lightning hit my head and I was like, I'm ready to go. And I wrote the book and I felt like so confident about that idea. But then as time went on, like I was kind of like poking at, there was like sort of cracks in the whole structure of the story. So that after my agent sold it, I ended up rewriting the whole story. Like the what happens of my book substantially changed with my agent. So even though I had spent with my editor, even though I had spent a lot of time finessing one version of the story, by the end, the version that will exist and be published is like pretty different from my first draft. And that happened with my book Where We Used to Roam, my like last book too. So I feel like in some ways, as I move forward in my career as an author, like I'm more open to changing and like having to change really big elements of my stories. Like I'm finding that sometimes the better idea isn't like my first idea, but like my 31st idea, or the idea that I get if I like mind meld with my editor. So that's been an incredible part. Yeah.
So I guess revision really changes.
Yeah, like I think it's easy to think of like, I mean, there's parts of revision that are really about fine tuning and working with the book on a sentence level and strengthening like parts of the story. And that part of revision is the same from one book to the next, like just trying to polishing and fine tuning. But there is that earlier stage of revision, which is really changing the story, like eliminating characters, realizing I need to create new characters, realizing that certain characters really don't have enough like backstory and trying to flesh stuff like that out. So it really changes.
That's really nice. So like I love like the way you have like every author has their own revision process. Some decide to leave, like I think that's more for editing, but I think some people decide to leave their novel somewhere. If it's on a desktop, then they just leave it on there, do not look at it and come back to a long time. I think that's one thing many people do.
Yeah, that's definitely part of my process is having like a substantial break. It's hard to make changes. If you work on something every day, it's hard to change big things about it because it's so familiar. And that's what's nice about working with an editor is particularly, your editor gets a copy and you don't know when you're going to hear back about it. And it's usually like at least a month. So you do have that like more substantial break, which allows you, because revision means to see again. And you can't see something again with fresh eyes if you are working on it every day.
Yeah, not just that, the other thing is that you're kind of attached to your work. It's like you really, because like probably after a month, you may still remember what you wrote, but not exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's like you really were into it so much, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because then like, for example, let's say your editor tells you to take out a character, like that's essentially like remove it, which is killing it in a way, right? So like when you're like told to that, you don't feel bad or anything or feel sad because you know it's right for the story. But if you're attached to the story, then maybe you might feel kind of sad and bad because you took that time to write that character.
I mean, I think there's just lots of things that are left like on the cutting room floor. And so I just try not to be too precious about it. But at the same time, like usually the reason a character is to get cut is because I know there's something that's not working in the story. So by the time I realize it's like, oh, this character's really gotten in the way, like I'm relieved to have solved that problem. So I have no problem cutting that character out because I'm like, like it came as like an aha moment, really.
Yeah, that's really, so actually on those lines again, like since we talked about editing and revision processes and everything, what is a writing kryptonite in the sense of revision and editing? And you can also state any other writing kryptonite you have other than in the areas of revision and editing.
Sorry, was that about writing group? I'm not sure I heard you correctly.
So writing kryptonite, so like do you have...
Oh, writing kryptonite, sorry, yes. Wait, and kryptonite, this is bad because I'm not a super... Kryptonite is a bad thing, right?
Yeah, it's like a weakness, kind of.
I mean, what's hard for me, again, because each book is different. Like there are some books, what is my kryptonite? I mean, I think generally that it's hard for me to be mean enough to my characters, so to make things hard enough for my characters can be challenging. And in the same way, I'm not always much of a plotter, so I'm kind of like having characters in search of a story for some of my drafts. So that's kind of my kryptonite too. Yeah.
That's a really interesting kryptonite, because I think like even I as a pantser, I have like an outline, but sometimes I plan on diverging from it, which makes it harder, because like especially since like I'm writing a fantasy novel, it's really hard to like put the character in like a difficult situation. So I see where you are like having an issue, because like I feel like pretty much any writer, no matter how good they are or how new they are to writing like me, they all kind of like have struggles in making, like not struggles you would say, but possibly like putting them in situations which are hard to come out of, but can be like removed from, kind of.
Right, and I also just care about my characters, and I think also because I'm sort of drawing from the world that I know, sometimes like my first idea of what happens is too similar to something that is real, but then also not like tough enough for the character. Like trying to put my character, back them into a corner, or have them make hard choices isn't always cut. It's not like top of mind sometimes, even though it is obviously my job as a writer is to make my characters suffer. So yeah, I think I'm getting a little better at it though.
I guess our characters are kind of like our kids in a way, right? Because like you want your child not to face too much difficulty, and you do not want it to be too easy as well for them. For example, you cannot give your character a first grade problem when they're actually in 8th grade, or give an 8th grade student and 12th grade question or something like that, unless they're overly smart, which is a different thing altogether.
That's a good way to think about it. I like that.
So what's your outlook on, since we're talking about characters as well, we might as well just touch base on that. How do you like develop your characters, give them strong personalities, or give them their own fears, misbeliefs? Like how do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I feel like it's very, I don't know, I'm jealous of authors that have like really organized processes. As you can tell, I'm still by nature a pantser, and so I kind of have to feel my way through my books with the first draft. So often like I always have a notebook where I start just like writing down random ideas about things with my character, because like usually I don't, at this point, before I used to just like jump right in and start writing when I had like very small amount of thoughts about the book. And that led to many, many drafts and like many attempts at like even just the first couple of chapters. And now I try to just like think about it more beforehand. So I always have a notebook that I'm working on for each book, and it, filled with sort of like free writes and little notes. And I try to have a page for each character and write like details about them and thinking about like their backstories. But I think it's still for me a process that happens over multiple drafts. Like I think in my first draft, I don't know everything that I need to know about my character, but usually by the time I have first draft and I can like set it aside and then read it, I have questions to answer for myself that help me like figure out more details about that character. But I must add, it's getting challenging for me because I'm now starting my 6th book, but I have 5 books, and each book has at least, my protagonist point of view character, but then like other characters that are pretty well developed. So it becomes a challenge out of it to create like people that are very distinct, not from just each other in the book, but then from other characters I've created in the past. It shouldn't be hard, because obviously you look at humanity and there are many different kinds of people, and like, it's all that comes down to the details, but it has been challenging for me to continue to like work to make all of my characters like very distinct and very human as I keep writing new things.
Yeah, I feel your answer is amazing. I mean, I'm saying that for everything, but I genuinely am saying this because like your answer, I think, would really help other writers who are new to writing or want to aspire to be an author or trying to do like write a story or whatever they're writing. I think if you have a unique character, I guess then your whole book turns around. Your book and your plot is your characters and your plot is kind of like what drives the story. Mm-hmm. And I think like some people decide to keep some flat characters, round characters. So this is one last question I have for you, which is based on characters, and then I'll ask you one fun question, and then you can give any final advice. So
okay.
My question is that what do you suggest? Like, do you think a book should have more round characters or flat characters? Like, and also why?
Yeah, I think pretty much every character in the book should be a round character. You should have characters that feel really like people in the world. I mean, I write contemporary fiction, so I'm always thinking about, you know, that my characters should feel as real as people that I meet and people that I know well. Because I think that's how my books can be really affecting. Like I try to write very emotionally driven human stories about kids in tough situations. And so I really want to reflect that reality. And I think the only way to do that is with characters that are very, you know, rounded and detailed. Yeah. Was there a second part to your question? I'm trying to remember.
Oh, no, it is just
okay.
one.
Okay.
That's actually a great answer, and I agree with what you said, since like round characters are more developed. I guess you can tell from the name flat, as in like flat road, which means they are not giving them any obstacles and giving them fears, misbeliefs. Round would mean having more flexibility, I guess you could say, more personality, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's another thing when during editing processes, I think authors and writers tend to make sure that their characters are round. And once you like change a flat into a round character, you can actually see the change which is occurring.
Definitely. And I think the big thing too is that like in your first draft of something, like there'll be lots of things that aren't working. That's normal. That's like a first draft. So like in my early drafts of things, is every character round yet? Like absolutely not. Like there are some characters that are not pulling their weight yet, and there are some characters that like, you know, just aren't fully developed. I mean, even for my book that's coming out next year, I'm doing line edits and I'm still layering in more details for one character because she just wasn't feeling as full and detailed. So I think it's important to know that, like, you know, it's just a part of the writing process is to give every character that richness that you find in real life.
Yeah. My last question for you is, if your book was made into a movie, like any of your books were made into a movie, who would be cast in it?
Oh, that's really hard for me because I don't know a lot of like actors that are the right age. Yeah, I really struggle with this. I do feel like for my if my third book, Things You Can't Say, was made into a movie, I feel like the character Phil should be played by Mark Ruffalo, but there are very few other times where I feel like super strongly about who should play the characters. I'm not immersed in that world yet. I have to do a lot of thinking about it. Sorry.
No worries. This is just a fun question.
Occasionally there's been times where I do like a deep dive, but it's probably been a while. I'd probably did that for when The Distance to Home came out. I definitely remember doing a blog post about this, but it's been a long time since then, so everyone's older.
Maybe you can try dream casting. I love doing that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So, because obviously, like, whatever you dream cast, if the book ever becomes like a movie, which I am pretty sure it will someday, right? The people you choose probably would be older, right? Maybe by
that's the forever problem. Yeah, writing about children is everybody just keeps getting older. But it's also, I think it could be really exciting if anything got made into a movie, is if the person is like one of their first acting jobs and it like launches their career. Like how cool.
Yeah, and not just that actually, but the thing is that when sometimes in movies and shows, when a character is supposed to be 12 years old, they take someone who's 14 and make them look younger.
Yeah.
Or take a younger person, make them older by adding wrinkles or whatever they need to do to make them look older.
Yeah, I was watching a show about college kids today, and one of the people playing a college student was 30. I was like, hey, come on, I guess then I can play a college student? It was kind of funny to realize. Like, that is quite older than a college student.
Yeah, my last and final question for you is, do you have any advice, any final advice for aspiring authors and writers?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice, so I used to be a teen librarian, and I think what really helps writers a lot is reading. You know, read the stuff that interests you, read some stuff by chance, because you never know where you might find inspiration or learn from. But I feel like what really helped me as a writer was just the volume that I read over my life leading up to now. Like part of it was that like I read books I didn't like and I was like, how did these get published? That helped make me feel like I could get published if the bar was not like that high. But then more than anything, I just feel like, you know, writing constantly inspires me. It's a huge part of what I feel like part of my job now, even though I'm published, is reading. Like I just feel like there's so much that I want to read and learn about. Yeah, so reading.
That's great. I think reading is the main thing, which I think most people around my age or even older, I guess as you grow older, somehow people lose interest in reading. I'm not sure why, but according to me, reading is magical. I feel like, especially when you're like so engaged into it, it feels like you're falling into another dimension.
Definitely. And I also feel like I think there's reading for pleasure, which helps you as a writer, but I think there's also like reading as a writer. And there are times when I know if there's something that's not working in my book and it's really helpful to read and to read sort of carefully other books that I love and see the way they execute certain kinds of scenes, or it's like, how do they capture passage of time, or like just little things that I can kind of get lost in the details and be like, how do I do this? Like, it is so nice that all these books exist for us to learn from. I just love that like all these books can also be like a textbook or like a mentor text for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that's the end of the episode. I loved having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you. So anyways, guys, that's the end of the episode. I'll see you all next week with a brand new episode. Bye, guys.